Welcome back. Now, as we've seen in the previous video, we're now able to shoot at the enemy drone, but we can't really see what we're shooting at. The mesh is in the way. And in addition to not being able to see what we're shooting at, it'd be nice to have some crosshairs, some kind of visual element that we can see exactly where we're aiming. Crosshairs are great for shooting games, and our collision tests project from the last section actually has some crosshairs, so we're going to get those into our project. So let's open collision tests, and in the content drawer we can go to assets and textures, and here we have one central dot. We can see by opening it up, here's our texture, and then we have the different arms from the bottom, left, right, and top. So we're going to get these over into our project. We can do that by simply taking the textures folder and migrating it. So I'm going to right click on it, migrate, click OK, and get this into my content folder, select that folder, and I'm done with collision tests. And now in my assets folder and textures, I have the crosshairs. And if I open them up, I can see what they look like. And we want all of these to be on the screen. Now, to put things on the screen, we have to use a special kind of blueprint called a widget blueprint. Widgets are HUD elements. HUD stands for heads up display, and this is things that we see on the screen in video games. They're in all games, things like progress bars, crosshairs, and what have you. So we need a widget blueprint where we can decide what to show on the screen. So to do that, I'm going to go to my blueprints folder, right click, make a new folder called UI for user interface. And in this folder, I'm going to make a new widget blueprint. I can do that by right clicking, scrolling down to user interface, and choosing widget blueprint. Now, when I create a widget blueprint, I have to choose a parent class, and the user widget is the class that we're going to derive from when we create widget blueprints. So I'm going to select user widget and call this WBP, short for widget blueprint, overlay HUD. And this will be the HUD that we see on the screen when we're playing the game. And this will have a crosshairs on it. So let's double click to open this up. And this looks a little different than an actor blueprint. It has a designer tab and a graph tab. The designer tab is where we design the widget blueprint visually, and the graph tab is where we can implement functionality. See, we have an event graph with nodes, much like the event graph in an actor blueprint. But we're interested in the designer tab, and what we want is the ability to drag images into our widget blueprint. Now, we can drag images in. We have a lot of different types of widgets in the palette panel. One of those is image, and if we drag that straight onto our event graph, well, we have this image. It's the size of the screen, and it doesn't have any specific texture selected for it, so it's just a white image. Image widgets have what's called a brush, and a brush is a structure that has a number of properties, including a texture called image. Now, if we select this image and open the image dropdown, we can choose one of these textures that we have for our crosshairs, such as the center. Now, this texture is now stretched across the entire viewport, and that's not exactly what I want to see. In addition to that, I want to drag multiple images on top of each other. And I can't do that either. If I drag another image in, it'll show me that I can't just release and get another one. If I want multiple images stacked on top of each other, I have to use a type of widget called an overlay. Now we can search the palette for different types of widgets. We can find overlay and we can bring it in. Notice we have a hierarchy panel that shows us the widgets we have in our widget blueprint. But if we bring an overlay in, it's not going to let us simply drag it and drop it because an image is not capable of having things stacked on top of it. It's the overlay widget that allows other things to stack on top of it. So we have to delete the image and bring in our overlay first. Now that we have an overlay, we can start bringing in images on top of the overlay. And notice that those images are no longer stretched. In fact, we can take that image, select it in the hierarchy, or select it in the designer graph, and we can specify whether we want it to stretch or not. We can do that under padding, where we see horizontal and vertical alignment. There are options to stretch it, or there are options to center it, or align it to the left, right, bottom, or top. We want center align both horizontally and vertically. And we can also go into our brush, into the image, and select one of our crosshair textures. I'm going to select crosshair center, and there it is, a tiny little dot. And it's right here in the center of the screen. And we can rename images in our hierarchy, and notice that they are attached to one another in a hierarchy. I'm going to rename this image to image underscore crosshair underscore center. And I'm going to drag in 4 more images. And as I drag them in, I'm going to drag them onto the overlay itself. I'm going to click on it and rename it to image crosshair left and change its image to crosshair left. Now it's all the way up at the top left by default, but again, under padding, I can set horizontal and vertical alignment to center, and now I have it right there in the middle. I'm going to do this for the 3 other widgets, and it shouldn't take long. All I need to do is drag in the image, rename it to image crosshair right, find the image crosshair right, set it to center, and there it is. Our next one, we'll drag it in, rename it to image crosshair top, set its image to crosshair top, set it to center, and one last image, renaming it to image crosshair bottom, setting its image to crosshair bottom, and making it centered. And there it is. Now, yes, this would be much easier with one single texture. That's true. But I'm using this from another project that had it as separate textures. And if you want to get fancy, you can animate these and make them shrink or expand. But for now, this will work. We now have an image. All we need to do is add it to our viewport. Now, which class we use to do this? Well, that depends on our project and our preferences. You can do it in the player controller class if you have a custom player controller. There's even a class designated for heads-up display called HUD, automatically spawned in your project. But for our project, we're going to keep it simple and just spawn it for now in our bot pawn on begin play. So in our bot pawn here on begin play, we're going to create an instance of our WBP overlay HUD. To do that, we have to use a special node called create widget. If we call create widget, it's kind of like spawn actor from class, only it's specifically for widgets. And we can select the widget class from the dropdown. We're going to choose WBP overlay HUD. We're going to go ahead and hook that up. Now we can give it an owning player, which is a player controller object reference. We're going to leave that blank for now. And we've now created a widget, but that's not enough. If we press play, we can't see it anywhere. That's because we have to add it to the viewport after we've created it. To do that, we take the return value, which has the type WBP overlay HUD object reference, and we call a function inherited from user widget called add to viewport. As soon as we do that, our widget will be added to the viewport, and we can press play, and we can see our crosshairs there. Now we still have a problem. Our mesh is right there in the center. Our crosshairs are in the middle, which is great, but our mesh is sort of in the way, right? So the last thing we're going to do in this video is move that mesh out of the way just a bit. Before we do that, let's give this a comment that says add overlay HUD to viewport. We'll give it a color and show bubble when zoomed out. And finally, let's move that mesh out of the way. Now, we don't have to move the mesh itself. What we can move is the camera. And instead of giving the camera an offset from the spring arm, that's not what I want. A better solution is to select the spring arm component and in the details panel, finding a property called socket offset. We can change the socket offset, and this allows us to move our camera but still be attached to the spring arm without a location offset. So if I take that third parameter of the socket offset vector and set it to about 45, now the camera will be raised a little bit, and we can press play, and we can see those crosshairs just above the mesh. And now it's a lot easier to shoot. Now there is a slight annoyance, and that's that our blaster beams are not always hitting exactly what we're aiming at. It's kind of hard to play test with the BP bot shooting at us. So in the BP bot event graph, I'm going to find fire blaster beam and just disconnect that node for now so it's no longer firing at us. Now I can play test without getting shot. And now if I shoot my blaster beams, notice that they're going straight forward and my mesh is not exactly aligned with my crosshairs anymore. So I'm not going to hit what I'm firing at. I have to overshoot a bit if I want to hit that bot. So how can we have the best of both worlds, where our crosshair is not being blocked by our mesh and we can see what we're shooting at, but also make sure our blaster beams hit precisely what our crosshairs are aiming at? Well, we're going to do exactly that in the next video. I'll see you soon.